Frank something or other, with tobacco-stained teeth and a permanent squint, was already waiting by the office door, sweating through his shirt despite the early afternoon breeze. He kept wiping his palms on his jeans and wouldn't make eye contact for more than a second at a time. My partner had called in sick that morning with food poisoning from bad sushi, leaving me to handle what dispatch described as complaints about an odor at this place wedged between an abandoned textile factory and a scrapyard where nobody asked questions. Frank led me through rows of orange metal doors, each one identical except for the fading numbers painted in white. Unit 47B sat at the end of a corridor, far from the main entrance where most renters kept their stuff. He told me the renter was some guy named Christopher Vaughn, who'd been paying cash 3 months in advance for the past 8 months. Never missed a payment. Never caused trouble until about 3 weeks ago when other renters started complaining. The smell got stronger with each step we took toward that unit, and I noticed Frank had stopped about 30 feet away, fumbling with his master keys while trying not to breathe through his nose. Dead pigeons lined the concrete near the unit's door, and flies buzzed in thick clouds despite the industrial-strength pest control the facility supposedly used monthly. When Frank finally got the padlock off, his hands trembling so bad he dropped the keys twice, I told him to step back and call for backup. The metal door rolled up with a grinding screech that echoed through the corridor, and what I saw inside made me understand why those pigeons had died. The unit was bigger than expected, maybe 10 by 20 feet, lined wall to wall with chest freezers. 7 of them, all humming with electricity, all duct taped shut around the edges like someone really didn't want them opened accidentally. The smell was overwhelming now, sweet and rotten and chemical all at once, like meat left in formaldehyde under the sun. Each freezer had a label maker strip across the front with dates going back months, some kind of coding system I couldn't immediately understand. Between the freezers were boxes of medical supplies, the kind you'd see in a hospital storage room. Surgical gloves, scalpels still in sterile packaging, bone saws, and bottles of chemicals with names I'd need a medical degree to pronounce. I pulled out my phone to call it in, but the signal was weak in the metal building, so I had to step outside. While I waited for the crime scene unit and additional officers, I asked Frank about Christopher Vaughn. He pulled out a rental agreement from a manila folder he'd been clutching, showing me a photocopy of a driver's license. The photo showed a thin man, maybe 35, with hollowed cheeks and eyes that seemed to stare through the camera rather than at it. Frank mentioned Vaughn always came at odd hours, usually after midnight or before dawn. Always alone, always carrying black garbage bags that looked heavy. The other renters had started complaining about the smell 3 weeks ago, but Frank admitted he'd noticed something weird months earlier when he'd seen Vaughn wheeling in what looked like restaurant equipment on a dolly at 3 a.m. The first unit arrived within 15 minutes. 2 patrol officers who immediately called for hazmat when they caught the smell. We established a perimeter while waiting for the crime scene techs, and I started running Vaughn's name through the system on my laptop in the car. What came back made my chest tighten. Christopher Eugene Vaughn, expelled from Northwestern's medical school 6 years ago for stealing cadavers from the anatomy lab. He'd been caught performing unauthorized procedures on bodies meant for student education, keeping detailed notes about decomposition rates and preservation methods. The university had pressed charges, but they were dropped when Vaughn agreed to psychiatric treatment. His last known address was his mother's house in Kenosha, but she'd reported him missing 2 years ago, said he'd become obsessed with something he called understanding the transition, and stopped taking his medication. By the time the crime scene unit arrived in full hazmat gear, we'd evacuated the entire facility and set up a command post in the parking lot. The lead tech, a woman named Diane, who'd worked scenes with me before, went in first with a camera while I watched the feed on a monitor they'd set up. When she cut through the duct tape on the first freezer and lifted the lid, even through the grainy video feed, I could see her whole body recoil. Inside, wrapped in clear plastic like cuts of meat at a butcher shop, were human remains in various stages of dismemberment. arms separated at the joints, organs in sealed bags with labels indicating weights and dates, everything arranged with a precision that made it clear this wasn't random violence. Diane's voice crackled through the radio, professional but strained, confirming what we could all see. We were dealing with multiple victims. Over the next 4 hours, the team documented everything while I coordinated with headquarters. Each freezer told its own horrible story. The second one contained what appeared to be complete skeletons, cleaned and numbered with tiny metal tags like museum specimens. The third had organs floating in jars of preservation fluid, each container meticulously labeled with extraction dates, body weights, and what looked like medical observations written in cramped handwriting. Diane found notebooks stacked between the freezers, hundreds of pages of detailed notes about decomposition rates, tissue preservation, and crude autopsy techniques. Vaughn had been teaching himself, using stolen bodies as practice. The medical examiner who arrived later identified at least 12 distinct individuals based on preliminary examination, though she warned the actual number could be higher. Most appeared to be bodies stolen from morgues and funeral homes across 3 states, matching reports of missing corpses that had been filed over the past 8 months. The breakthrough came when one of the techs found a laptop hidden behind the 7th freezer, still logged into Vaughn's email account. He'd been corresponding with black market dealers, people who sold medical specimens to underground collectors and unlicensed research facilities. But the emails showed he'd never actually sold anything. Instead, he kept writing about perfecting his technique, about understanding death in a way medical school never taught. One email to a potential buyer, dated just 5 days ago, said he was close to something important, that he'd discovered patterns in decomposition that nobody else had documented. The laptop also contained hundreds of photos, each showing different stages of his work. Faces blurred out, but everything else in sharp, clinical detail. There were spreadsheets tracking everything from ambient temperature to humidity levels in the storage unit, treating the whole thing like some twisted scientific experiment. We tracked Vaughn down through his credit card. Despite paying for the storage unit in cash, he'd been stupid enough to use his visa at a motel about 40 miles north, near the state line. The place was one of those pay-by-the-week dumps where nobody asked questions, and the carpets hadn't been cleaned since the 90s. Local police surrounded room 23 just after sunset, and I was there when they breached the door. Vaughn didn't resist. He was sitting at a desk made of particle board, writing in another notebook surrounded by medical textbooks and printed articles about decomposition. He looked nothing like his driver's license photo anymore. His hair had grown past his shoulders, greasy and tangled, and he'd lost so much weight his clothes hung off him like they belonged to someone else. His fingernails were long and dirty, with what looked like dried blood underneath them. When I read him his rights, he just nodded and asked if we'd found his work, said it was important that someone preserved his research. During the interrogation, Vaughn was disturbingly calm, speaking about the bodies like a professor discussing lab specimens. He admitted to everything but seemed genuinely confused why we were treating it as a crime. He explained how he'd gotten the bodies, bribing night shift workers at funeral homes, breaking into morgues using stolen key cards, sometimes taking bodies that were meant for cremation so they wouldn't be missed immediately. He'd been practicing autopsies, teaching himself what medical school had denied him, documenting everything because he believed he was contributing to science. When I asked him about the families of these people, about the violation of human dignity, he tilted his head like I was speaking a foreign language. He said the dead didn't care, that they were just organic matter reorganizing itself, and that his work would help future medical students understand decomposition better than any textbook. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and I testified on the second day. Vaughn's lawyer tried for an insanity plea, bringing in psychiatrists who diagnosed him with severe delusional disorder and obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. But the jury saw through it. The meticulous planning, the careful selection of victims who wouldn't be immediately missed, the elaborate concealment methods, it all pointed to someone who knew exactly what they were doing was wrong. He got life without parole. though he never stopped insisting he was a researcher, not a criminal. The storage facility was demolished 6 months later, after the owner couldn't rent a single unit. Frank quit the day we found everything and moved to Florida. Said he couldn't stop smelling that stench even after the place was cleaned. The families of the identified bodies finally got closure, could finally have proper burials, though some remains were too damaged to ever be returned. I retired 2 years after the Vaughn case, earlier than I'd planned. Not because of fear or trauma, but because something fundamental had shifted in how I saw the job. In 15 years, I'd investigated murders driven by rage, greed, jealousy, emotions I could at least understand even if I condemned them. But Vaughn's complete detachment, his ability to see human bodies as nothing more than study materials, left me with questions I couldn't answer. Sometimes I still get calls from journalists wanting to write about the case, especially around the anniversary. I always decline. What haunts me isn't the horror of what we found in that storage unit, but Vaughn's genuine belief that he was doing something valuable. The last thing he said to me, as they led him away in shackles, was that someone would continue his work someday. That knowledge couldn't be suppressed forever. I hope he's wrong, but sometimes late at night, I wonder if there's someone else out there, in another storage unit or basement, carrying on where he left off.
It sucks.
I'm Detective Ellen Carter, and I've been with the police force in a small Colorado town for about 12 years now. It was a Monday morning in early September 2022 when everything changed for me. I'd just gotten back from a week-long vacation with my husband and our 2 kids, feeling refreshed and ready to dive back into what I thought would be another routine week of petty thefts and noise complaints. Our town had always been one of those places where people left their doors unlocked and kids played in the streets until dark. I was sitting at my desk, catching up on paperwork and sipping the terrible coffee from the break room machine, when dispatch called about a welfare check on Cedar Lane. Mrs. Thompson hadn't shown up for her weekly book club, and her friends were worried because she never missed a meeting, not even when she had pneumonia 2 winters ago. Cedar Lane was one of those picture-perfect suburban streets with matching mailboxes and well-maintained lawns that looked like they belonged in a real estate magazine. I drove there alone since my partner was testifying in court that day, figuring it would be a quick check. Probably find Mrs. Thompson had fallen asleep watching TV, or maybe taken an unexpected trip to visit her daughter in Denver. The Thompson house was a modest 2-story with pale yellow siding and a wraparound porch decorated with hanging baskets of petunias that were starting to wilt in the late summer heat. When I knocked and got no answer, I noticed the front door was actually slightly ajar. Just a crack, like someone had tried to close it but the latch hadn't caught properly. The mail from Saturday was still sticking out of the mailbox, and there was a package from Amazon sitting on the porch that looked like it had been there for at least a couple of days, based on the water stains from the sprinkler system. I pushed the door open with my shoulder, announcing myself loudly as I stepped inside. The house smelled weird, not like death. I knew that smell too well from my years on the force, but something chemical mixed with the lingering aroma of cooked food. The living room looked completely normal. TV remote on the coffee table next to a half-finished crossword puzzle, and reading glasses. But when I walked through to the dining room, that's when I saw her. Mrs. Thompson was sitting perfectly upright in her chair at the head of the table, facing a full plate of what looked like roast chicken, with mashed potatoes and green beans. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, and her eyes were closed like she just dozed off during dinner. The food hadn't been touched. The butter pad on the potatoes hadn't even melted, and there was still steam condensation on the inside of the water glass, which told me this meal had been served recently, maybe within the last day or 2. I checked for a pulse, even though her skin had that waxy gray tint that meant she'd been gone for at least 24 hours.
Diagnosed with Crohn's disease and struggling with your symptoms, it's not too soon to talk to your doctor about Entyvio for moderate to severe Crohn's.
The positioning was what bothered me most. Nobody dies naturally sitting that perfectly straight, with their hands folded like they're posing for a family portrait. I called it in immediately, requesting backup and the coroner, then started examining the scene more carefully without touching anything. The kitchen showed signs of normal meal preparation. Dirty pots in the sink, vegetable peelings in the trash, a cookbook still open to a recipe for herb-roasted chicken. But there was also a clipboard on the counter with what looked like a work order from Riverside Utilities, dated 3 days prior, signed by someone named Jason Brennan, with a note about checking the gas lines for the neighborhood modernization project. I photographed everything with my phone while waiting for the crime scene unit, and that's when I noticed something else strange. There was a second place setting at the table, directly across from Mrs. Thompson, but that plate was completely clean, like someone had eaten their entire meal and even wiped the plate with bread. While the forensics team processed the Thompson house, I decided to canvass the neighborhood to see if anyone had noticed this utility worker or anything unusual over the past few days. The first neighbor I talked to was Mr. Gallagher, a retired postal worker who lived directly across the street and was known for sitting on his porch most afternoons. He mentioned seeing a white van with Riverside Utilities painted on the side, parked in front of several houses on the street earlier in the week. But he hadn't thought much of it since there had been notices about infrastructure updates posted on everyone's doors the previous month. He described the worker as a clean-cut guy, maybe mid-30s, wearing the typical blue uniform and carrying a toolbox and clipboard. What stuck with Mr. Gallagher was how friendly the guy was, stopping to chat with everyone, asking about their families. Even helped Mrs. Ningian carry her groceries in when he saw her struggling with the bags. That's when Mrs. Gallagher mentioned something that made my chest tighten with dread. She said their next-door neighbors, the Andersons, hadn't been seen since Saturday, and their newspaper was piling up on the driveway. The Andersons were a couple in their 60s who kept to themselves, but were reliable about maintaining their property. Their garage door was still open with both cars inside, which was completely out of character for them. I radioed for additional units immediately, and headed to the Anderson house with 2 officers who had just arrived as backup. The front door was locked, but when we went around back, we found the sliding glass door to the kitchen unlocked. The smell hit us immediately, that same chemical odor mixed with food, but stronger this time. In the dining room, we found Mr. and Mrs. Anderson seated at opposite ends of their table, both in that same unnaturally upright position, both with untouched plates of food in front of them. Looked like spaghetti with meat sauce, salad on the side, glasses of red wine that had never been sipped. The Andersons had the same clipboard on their kitchen counter, same Riverside Utilities letterhead, same signature from Jason Brennan, dated the day before Mrs. Thompson's visit. But this time I found something else. A business card tucked under a magnet on their refrigerator with the Riverside Utilities logo, and a phone number. When I called it from my cell, I got a disconnected number message. The real Riverside Utilities, when we contacted them, had no record of any Jason Brennan, no scheduled maintenance on Cedar Lane, and their official vans were accounted for in their fleet. They also confirmed their workers wore orange uniforms, not blue, and they never did door-to-door visits without sending official letters at least 2 weeks in advance. The forensics photographer was documenting everything when one of the officers found something in the Andersons' trash. An empty box of fancy chocolates with a thank you note that read, "For being such wonderful neighbors, Jason from Riverside Utilities." By this point, we had the entire street blocked off and were going door to door. Most residents were at work, but the retirees and stay-at-home parents were all accounted for and safe, though shaken when we explained what was happening. Then we got to the Washburn house at the end of the cul-de-sac. Joyce Washburn was a widow in her 70s, who lived alone and was known for her incredible garden and homemade jam that she gave out every Christmas. Her car was in the driveway, her sprinklers were running on schedule, but she wasn't answering the door. The neighbor had a spare key. They checked on each other regularly. And when we entered, I already knew what we'd find. There she was, seated at her small kitchen table with a bowl of soup and a sandwich in front of her, untouched, hands folded, that same terrible upright posture. The clipboard was there too, but this time there was also a plate of cookies on the counter with a handwritten note. "Joyce, thank you for the lovely chat and lemonade. Enjoy these as a small token of appreciation. JB. The medical examiner arrived within the hour and did preliminary tests on Mrs. Thompson while we waited. He found no obvious signs of violence or struggle, but noted petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes and a slight blue tinge around her lips that suggested poisoning. The way he explained it to me, certain toxins could cause respiratory paralysis while keeping the victim conscious and aware for several minutes, long enough for someone to position them however they wanted. The thought of these poor people being unable to move or call for help while this monster arranged them like dolls at their own dinner tables made me physically sick. I had to step outside for a minute to compose myself, and that's when I saw something that everyone else had missed. Fresh tire tracks in the mud beside Joyce Washburn's driveway, where her sprinklers had overwatered the edge of the lawn. The tracks were distinctive. Heavy vehicle, probably a van, with what looked like a nail or screw embedded in the rear left tire that left a small puncture mark every rotation. We immediately put out a bolo for any white van with Riverside Utilities markings and that specific tire damage. I spent the rest of that day and most of the night interviewing neighbors, reviewing security footage from the few houses that had cameras, and trying to piece together this Jason Brennan's movements. The security footage we did get showed him clearly. Average height, brown hair, clean shaven, probably around 35, wearing that blue uniform and always carrying the same black toolbox and clipboard. He had this way of walking with a slight bounce in his step, almost cheerful, and in one video you could see him whistling while he walked up to the Andersons' door. What really got to me was how normal he looked, how he smiled and waved at a kid riding by on a bicycle, how he stopped to pet someone's dog. He spent between 30 and 45 minutes in each house, and in every case, he was the last person seen entering before the victims were found dead. The breakthrough came around 3 a.m. when an officer found the van abandoned in a grocery store parking lot about 15 miles away. It had been set on fire, but the rain from that evening had put it out before it was completely destroyed. The VIN number had been filed off, but our forensics team found partial prints on a water bottle in the cab and DNA on a cigarette butt. The toolbox was still in the back, containing vials of what turned out to be succinylcholine, a paralytic drug used in hospitals that's incredibly hard to get without medical credentials, mixed with a slow-acting poison that would kill within hours. There were also stacks of fake business cards, several blue uniforms, and most disturbing of all, a notebook with addresses and details about dozens of elderly residents across 3 states, with Cedar Lane being just one of many streets marked with red check marks. Mrs. Thompson, the Andersons, and Joyce Washburn all had stars next to their names with notes like "Lives Alone," "Trusting," and "Offers Refreshments." We ran the prints and DNA through every database we had access to, and got a hit 6 hours later. The man calling himself Jason Brennan was actually Gregory Hoffman, a former hospice nurse who'd lost his license 5 years earlier for stealing medications, and who had a history of financial fraud targeting elderly patients. He'd been moving across the Midwest, hitting small towns where people still trusted strangers in uniforms, where elderly folks living alone would open their doors to a friendly utility worker, warning about gas leaks, or offering free safety inspections. We caught him 2 days later at a motel in Nebraska, preparing to hit another neighborhood. He'd already distributed flyers and made initial contact with several potential victims. When we arrested him, he was calm, almost proud, and the only thing he said was that he'd been helping them avoid the indignity of dying alone in nursing homes. He's now serving 3 life sentences, but I know there are more victims out there we haven't found yet. I still drive by Cedar Lane sometimes, and even though new families have moved into those houses, I can't forget how I found those people, posed at their tables like some sick art installation, their last meals growing cold in front of them.
tried multiple oral antidepressants and they haven't worked?
Good eye. Again, trying to get Dan to count in like Dan's little camera guy, but one of these days. All right, welcome back to Blurry Creatures. Today's guest is Blake Cook. Blake, welcome to the Blurry Basement.
Oh, thanks for having me
You
here.
just made it into the 80s. You slipped into 1989, but hey,
You made it.
you made it. You're a Purple Heart winner and former SWAT team leader. Just a true man all around, you know. True badass. And us over here with the dummies on the Blurry Creatures Basement. But we're going to ask some questions today. Get into your story. And we're going to give you a license to get as weird as possible. I know some of these podcast episodes are a little bit more, you keep things a little more professional, but you can get as weird as you want.
Weird, man. So I'm here for it.
All right. And then the way we
Weird.
start that is ask you the question, what are your thoughts on Bigfoot? And then we can go where you want to go.
My thoughts on Bigfoot's real. He's just smarter than us. He knows how to dodge technology. But
Any stories? Any run-ins?
no, there's a guy where I live. So I grew up in southern West Virginia, in the Appalachian Mountains, and there's a Mr. Stover, who is a legend, pioneer, mountaineer kind of guy. Lives in the woods. He walked like 10 hours one time to the state capitol to get roads paved. Like he's about it. He lives in the woods, and he swears up and down that he has seen Bigfoot multiple times, and I believe him.
Yeah.
He's just one of those guys that just doesn't lie. I've never experienced anything, but I believe he's real.
Well, there's a lot of places in West Virginia. You
Yeah.
know how
I believe in aliens too. I don't care what people
Yeah.
say.
John Denver saw Bigfoot, probably. Bigfoot, I think, avoids the country roads. But
Yeah, Country Roads is not even about West Virginia. It's not even about West Virginia.
but we like the stories with gentlemen in uniform that have had these paranormal experiences on the ground. And I think that you do enough weird stuff, you're in action for long enough, you're gonna have some stories to tell. And on our podcast, we're always sort of looking for the more paranormal, strange stuff. But you have a long career, and I'm sure you've had some encounters and some moments that you were like, that's more than just human evil going on here, I'm assuming.
Yes, I've had one really weird encounter on duty. Sticks with me forever. I'll never forget it. My wife made me strip down naked outside. Wouldn't even let me wear my clothing inside. Because I was like, it was weird. So
It's quite the move.
Yeah,
That could be
so-
normal.
could be.
Like,
Gotta get naked before you come inside. I didn't know how to take that.
Not saying
but
no
then-
to that, yeah.
You're like, then she
Alright,
hit me with a
bye.
bunch of sage and choked me to death. And it wasn't what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, it sounds.
Big letdown.
Yeah. Like, tick check. Tick check.
No, but I mean, I'll tell you about that one if you want to hear it.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
Let's start with that. Yeah. That sounds good.
Yeah, so this is back when I was a patrol officer before I went up to the gang unit, and I used to love the third shift, which was it was like start at 6 p.m. and ended at like 3. It was the weird hours. You know, you had the car wrecks, but then and some shoplifters. But then after 9, you know, when the sun goes down, the goons come out and play, and you're really running and gunning. But there was an apartment complex where the caller on the first floor called 911 for a physical disturbance for the floor above, and said they could hear a man and woman yelling. The man was yelling in a really deep voice that he's going to kill her, and he's taking over her soul. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. This is normal domestic. Husband's drunk, right? Came home, wearing out his old lady, and she's not going to call for help. So we're on our way. We get there, and I knock on the door, and I hear this deep voice. I was like, Fayetteville Police, open up. And it's like, get the F out of here. You don't want you here. And I was like, oh, well, sorry, we're here. I'm like, you need to open up, my friend. And then I hear, help. So we took a step back, kicked the door in. As soon as the door came open, there was a female that was standing right in front of the door, so we grabbed her, pulled her back, gave her back to the third officer, and then myself, and the secondary officer cleared the whole structure. The place was trashed. I mean, couches, like massive sectional couches, flipped. All the glass was broken. All the dishes and drawers were out. I mean, anything that was in that house was completely destroyed. And then we went to her bathroom, and she had a big, massive, probably 6x6. She had like a double sink, so it was a massive, one big mirror. It was completely broken, except for this one section that I forgot the verse that was on it, but she'd actually cut herself. Well, somebody cut her, and then wrote a cross with a verse on this piece of glass.
In blood?
In blood. So now I'm going to windows. I'm like, man, this dude's in here or he's jumped out, right? So we clear it, nothing. So I go back out and I'm all right, let me talk with her. And as I'm talking to her, I'm getting her information. She's cut real bad. EMS comes, they wrap her up, and I'm asking her, hey man, what happened? Or who's in the apartment with you? And she's like, nobody's in the apartment with me. I'm like, look, I get you're trying to protect your man here. I'm like, but like, this is an issue. And so I'm trying to pry information out, which is, I'm just thinking it's just a battered wife who doesn't want their husband going to jail. And she looks up at me, and he goes, I was like, oh, I was like, okay. I was like, that's sounds identical to the voice that I heard.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's go ahead, click, you're going in handcuffs for a minute till we can figure this out. So we're like, all right, maybe she's super schizo, right? Maybe she's schizophrenic. She's sitting there speaking perfect Latin. Don't have no idea what she's saying, but perfect Latin, like fluent. And we're like, all right, she got to go to the hospital.
Right.
And my sergeant comes in. Again, I'm a rookie, right? I'm the rookiest guy out there. And my sergeant's like, all right, Cook, take her down to the hospital. I'm like, you want me to put her in my car after she's... Because I believe that people get possessed. Y'all might not believe that.
Oh, so you thought that at the time?
Oh, yeah, I was like... At first, I thought she was schizo until she started speaking perfect Latin.
Yeah.
And then I was like, cross, Bible verse, perfect Latin. This is weird.
You go to hospital.
So you're telling your chief and your crew that
I'm telling my supervisor on scene that, and he's like, you're an idiot. Okay. Oh, he's schizo. Take her to the hospital. I was like, yeah, okay, cool, roger that. So get her in the car, and she's just sitting there like she's still yelling perfect Latin, have no idea what she's saying. We make a turn. The hospital's a mile and a half away max. We turn on All American Freeway, and again I hear her do this deep laugh. She's like, what are you gonna do, Samuel? And Samuel's my first name. But Samuel's not on my badge. It's not on my shirt. It's not on paper. Anything that I did paperwork-wise was Blake.
Yeah. Really?
There's only one person that calls me Sam and Samuel, and that's my grandfather. All my court documents, everything, there's nothing in that vehicle or on my computer screen that said that my name was Samuel. I hit my lights,